emails, and I was like, "Are those fake?" He goes, "No, those were real emails that we printed out."
Printed them out. Love it.
But we actually had questions for today.
Yeah.
We did.
Paul, why do you believe it's important that we get the history right with the GI Bill and the New Deal? I mean, many soldiers came back to the Jim Crow South and faced severe discrimination after serving, denied work in their uniforms, having issues with access to housing. With books like The Color of Law, where the author Richard Rothstein paints a picture of an extremely racist America, are you trying to say that none of that happened?
No, definitely not. And you know, this is one example where don't just go by the title of an article. But you know, in the article I talk about with the GI Bill. I mean, I think most people are familiar with it, but this is created in 1944, called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, and it really gives a huge display of benefits that we would be shocked to see today. You know, so you got unemployment benefits weekly that could last up to a year, and you could stagger how you use them. So you could use it for about 2 months. You could go work for 3 months and then say, well, I don't want to work this summer, and then go back and use, you still have 8 months left on your, or no, 10 months left on your GI Bill benefits. So included all of that, include access to home loans. And I think what most people know when they think about is the access to higher education for up to 4 years of college, totally free. So, you know, I do go in an article about the experience for Black soldiers was mixed. So on the one hand, you know, you have the home loan program, pretty much they could not take advantage of due to the practice of the real estate industry at the time. But, you know, what you just mentioned, veterans returning to, you know, a Jim Crow society, being denied employment, being denied all these things. What you actually find if you go into interviews with Black GI Bill users and the archives is they actually remark the GI Bill still one of the few things going on from the federal government that they could, you know, experience during that time. And so, you know, I think we have to look at it and be specific what we're talking about with the GI Bill, whether we're talking about the education benefits or the housing benefits, to get a fuller picture. And you know, there's a few arguments out there for about the GI Bill. I mean, one of them is actually that not only did Blacks not really get full access to it, but that it actually made racial inequality worse. And so I think the most sophisticated form of this argument goes something like, you know, white workers, they use these benefits to get a college education, to get better jobs, to get homes, and that led to all this increased wealth. And so it just led to this bigger gap between white people and Black people. That's one argument of that. And, you know, I think if you actually look at it, the picture is much more nuanced. And I think one way that argument is flawed is that it looks only at college education. But the GI Bill also offered, you know, trade schools, vocational schools.
Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Sorry to interrupt you. So you bring this up in your. So excuse me if I mix it up, because I read two pieces at the same time. I read yours, and I read the piece that came out in the New York Times probably like 5 years ago. Similarly about the same thing. It went down a much different path, right? It went down the racist path a lot more, and told more racist narratives, but it ended in the same place as yours, actually. And I think that's an important, and I think that's also kind of important that I want to cover in the show, because yours stays on point, where that one, you know, definitely not a lot of people read 2,000 word articles.
Yeah.
Right. Let's be honest. You read the head, you read the tagline, you read the block quotes, and you pretty much get it. And if you read that from the New York Times piece, then you would just think that the GI Bill was massively racist. But again, you guys end in the same place. But one thing that both of your pieces talk about is a lack of high school educated Black people that were going into the service.
Right.
And you guys both talk about a push by the NAACP to get Black people to enlist because of the GI Bill, that this was going to be the equalizer, if you will. It's going to lift them out of poverty in pre-civil rights America and into some sort of middle class. And of course, I believe you write about this too. Black universities were overrun with students to the point where they would, no, we can't take anymore. And some people were complaining about being pushed into vocational training when they wanted traditional 4-year education.
Yeah.
And getting pushed into unskilled labor. And these are realities of the time. This is bigger than just a bill solving all problems. The bill was never designed, and you say this, to be a sweeping reform of racism in America and do what the Civil Rights Bill would do, 20 years later?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in. Yeah,
Please,
I think
please.
I mean, there's a few things there. One of them is the problem of looking just at college education. Bill is that going into World War II, the Black soldiers that enlisted, much higher percentage of them than the white soldiers still had not completed a high school education due to, a whole number, of course, of discriminatory unequal factors. So coming out of the war, clearly, Black were not in a position like white were to take advantage of the college education because they hadn't even graduated high school yet. So if you use that as the marker, you're not really judging the GI Bill, you're judging basically the society as it existed before World War II. So that's one issue of that, that lens to look at. And you did mention, with HBCUs, it's kind of thanks to the GI Bill, HBCUs expanded greatly. Now, in a way, you could say that's good. The downside of that is they were expanding, not given the resources to really handle this capacity. But it does show you that many, many Black veterans were able to use the GI Bill. Now, the problem was in the South, they would use it at historically Black colleges and universities. But the kind of point I'm trying to make throughout this article is that people are confusing causal factors here. So the fact that Black veterans in the South could only use it at HBC, is that the fault of the GI Bill, or is that the fault of the Jim Crow system that had been around for decades? That's not the cause of the GI Bill. The fact that Black people going into the workforce face discrimination, even if they get college education, again, is that the GI Bill that caused that, or is that the Jim Crow system that caused that? Or I could keep going down the line. So I think this is where people get it wrong. I think real estate question is the other one. I mean, not being able to take advantage of these homes, the government guaranteed the loans, but you would have to go through a bank. And there, of course, is really this whole system of practices to deny Black people access to housing. People are getting this cause and effect confused. So it's like, yes, the Bill, no one is claiming the GI Bill and the Jim Crow, no one is claiming it ended racism in this country. But what you kind of see, again, from the interviews with actual Black veterans that used it, was it represented something much better than they had actually ever experienced before with government. And for many of them, they had a very positive experience. So from the data we have of veterans, Black veterans in the North and the South were actually used the GI Bill at a higher rate than white veterans. So there were more white veterans who didn't even take advantage of the bill. Also, Black veterans were way more likely to say this was like a life-changing legislation than white veterans were. So again, I mean, I trust that these Black veterans were adults and they understood that life, isn't perfect, and they understood that this can be a good thing while also understanding racism is, and everything in our society is not fixed. But this is kind of like a positive experience that could be built on in other ways. But I think it's that causal factor, and I think some of it depends who's doing it. I think some of it is just very cynical the way they're doing it. I think why this matters. I mean, this is partly a academic debate in a sense of like getting the history right, but why I think this matters is weaponized today. And it's like brick by brick, like article by article, every facet of the New Deal is being dismissed as racist with no nuance, and like that's all being used to build this wall against any sort of socialist or left politics, from Bernie Sanders to whatever. This history is really being weaponized current moment, which is why I think it matters to kind of go back into these historical debates beyond just an abstract academic thing.